Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, what am I really doing here? Not just at your desk, not just at your job, but in the grand theater of life itself. Why are you doing what you're doing? Every morning we get up, put on our uniforms, whether they be suits, scrubs, aprons, or hoodies, and we go to work. We clock in, answer emails, meet deadlines, chase promotions. We perform. But somewhere beneath that performance, there's a subtle tension, a quiet discomfort, a sense that maybe, just maybe, something is off. And that's what Alan Watts was so brilliant at exposing. He didn't just talk about peace and joy in some abstract spiritual sense. He showed us how our daily lives, especially our work, are often built on illusions. And the biggest illusion of all is this: that work is separate from life. That it is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Let's start with the most dangerous question you can ask yourself at work. What's next? It seems harmless, even productive. What's the next project? The next goal, the next promotion? But Alan Watts would ask, why are you always moving forward? Why are you chasing a future that never arrives? Because if life is always somewhere in the future, then you are never truly living. You are merely preparing to live. And that's the biggest mistake we make at work. We sacrifice the present moment for a future that's always out of reach. We treat the workday like a tunnel we have to crawl through to get to the real life waiting on the other side. But what if there is no tunnel? What if this moment, yes, even in your cubicle, is it?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Think about this. You spend 1/3 of your life working. Maybe more. That's tens of thousands of hours. And if you're not fully alive in those hours, where are you? You're in your head. You're in the future. You're in escape. You're in control mode. And control is the enemy of peace. You're not creating, you're calculating. You're not living, you're surviving. And when you live that way long enough, your soul starts to shrink. You become what Alan Watts called a quaking mess of anxiety. Not because the world is inherently stressful, but because you're living in resistance to it. Let's go deeper. We've been conditioned to think that work is a transaction. You give time, you get money. But Alan Watts saw that as a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of reality. He reminded us that the universe is not a business, it's a play, a cosmic game. And your job, your role, your title, that's just a costume. A temporary identity you put on for a few hours a day. But here's the problem, you forget it's a costume. You get stuck in the role. You start to believe that you are your job. And that's where the suffering begins. Because when your identity is tied to your performance, every failure feels like death. Every mistake feels like a threat to your existence. And so you tighten your grip. You try to control more, achieve more, prove more. But in doing so, you lose touch with the joy of simply being. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt joy at work? Not just satisfaction, not just success, but joy. That deep, spontaneous, unforced sense of this is what I'm here for. If it's been a while, or if you've never felt it at all, that's not your fault. It's the system you were born into, and a system that trains us to view work as punishment, not play, as obligation, not expression, as survival, not celebration. But what if that system is wrong? What if the purpose of work isn't to grind, but to grow. Not just to make a living, but to feel alive. Alan Watts once said, "This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play." Now that sounds radical, doesn't it? Especially when you've got bills to pay, bosses to please, deadlines to meet. But here's the thing, it's not about what you do. It's about how you do it. You can clean floors with joy. You can write code with curiosity. You can lead meetings with mindfulness. The mistake is believing that joy only comes after the task is done. But what if joy is found in the task, if only you'd stop resisting it? Here's a philosophical challenge for you. What if you stopped working for the outcome and started working for the experience? What if the goal wasn't to finish, but to fully engage? That doesn't mean you give up structure or discipline. It means you bring presence to every step. You taste the moment, and in that tasting you realize something profound. There is no future moment more important than this one. That realization changes everything. Suddenly, the spreadsheet becomes a canvas. The conversation becomes a meditation. The mundane becomes sacred. But it requires a shift, a letting go. You have to release the idea that your worth is measured by your productivity, that your time only has value if it's earning profit, and that your job is your identity, because it's not. You are not a machine. You are not a cog. You are not a title. You are consciousness, experiencing itself through the lens of work. And when you remember that, even the most ordinary tasks become extraordinary expressions of life. Yet most of us don't live that way. We live in fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. And that fear drives us to control, to micromanage, to overthink. But Alan Watts would remind us, you're under no obligation to be the person you were 5 minutes ago. In other words, you can drop the identity at any moment. You can step out of the act. You can choose presence over performance. You can choose play over pressure. Here's the twist. When you do that, you often become better at your job. Why? Because creativity flows best in freedom. The ideas come when you're relaxed, not rigid. Collaboration works when you're open, not defensive. Leadership shines when you're authentic, not afraid. So ironically, when you stop trying to control everything, you actually become more effective. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're working from your center, not your ego. So I want to ask you something deeply personal. Who are you when you're not performing? Who are you when you stop trying to be impressive, efficient, or productive? Who is the you behind the worker? That's the person Alan Watts wanted you to meet. Not the mask, not the resume, but the real you. And that person, when allowed to emerge, doesn't just go to work, they bring life to work. They turn ordinary jobs into extraordinary expressions of being. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real purpose of work isn't to climb, but to wake up, and to remember who you are, to bring awareness into motion, to turn labor into love, not through effort, but through presence. What would happen if tomorrow you brought your whole self to work? Not the self that's trying to be perfect, and the self that's curious, playful, awake. What if you showed up not to prove your worth, but to express it? What if you stopped chasing the future and started inhabiting the now? Would your work change, or would you? We've been taught to divide our lives into fragments: work over here, life over there, stress in the office, peace on the weekend, soul at home, strategy at work. But what if this division is the very thing that's killing our joy? Alan Watts challenged this illusion directly. He believed that the separation between the sacred and the mundane is false. The divine doesn't live only in temples or mountaintops, it lives in the details of your ordinary day, in the way you answer an email, in the way you speak to a colleague, in the way you sit in your chair and breathe. When you see your workplace not as a battlefield, but as a temple, everything changes. You stop trying to escape your job and you start using it as a mirror, a place to practice presence, awareness, compassion, and authenticity. That's not just philosophy, that's a revolutionary way to live. Think about it. What is a temple, really? It's a space designed for deep attention, a place where you slow down, connect, and remember what matters. Now ask yourself, what if my desk is my altar? What if my meetings are my meditations? What if every moment at work is an invitation to return to myself? You don't need incense or chants or mantras. You just need attention. Because attention is what turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. Most people treat work like a burden to be carried. But the wise see it as a practice ground. Every difficult co-worker becomes a teacher in patience. Every tight deadline, a lesson in surrender. Every boring task, a challenge in mindfulness. The goal isn't to escape the job, it's to wake up within it. Because if you can find peace in the chaos of the office, you can find it anywhere. But here's the hard part. This kind of presence requires you to drop the ego. And the ego loves the drama of work. It feeds on comparison, competition, control. It thrives in meetings where everyone's trying to be the smartest person in the room. It lives for promotions, titles, and praise. The ego makes work about you, your image, your status, your narrative. But Alan Watts would remind us the ego is nothing more than the focus of conscious attention. That means it's not real in the way you think it is. It's a lens, and you can choose to look through a different one. One that sees work not as a stage for your performance, but as a flow you participate in. You're not the star, you're not the director. You're the instrument and life is playing through you. So how do we begin? It starts with a shift in attention. When you type an email, feel your fingers on the keys. When you walk to a meeting, notice your steps. When you speak, listen to the sound of your own voice. These are not small things. They are everything. Because attention is presence and presence is peace. And peace is not found in some distant future where your inbox is finally empty and your boss finally understands you. Peace is found in the now, in the exact moment you stop resisting what is. That's the spiritual path. Not in some retreat in the Himalayas, but in the heart of your 9 to 5. Alan Watts didn't want you to escape life. He wanted you to enter it fully. And sometimes, the place you least want to be, your office, your job, your routine, is exactly where your awakening begins. Imagine what would happen if you approached your workday the same way a monk approaches their daily practice. Not with dread, but with devotion. Not with a craving for results, but with reverence for the process itself. Can you really see your workspace as sacred? Can you treat your to-do list like a spiritual scroll, not filled with obligations, but opportunities for presence? Alan Watts often emphasized that the true spiritual life isn't about escaping the world, it's about being fully in it without being enslaved by it. That means you can live your spiritual path in the office, in the break room, in the Zoom call. The test of awakening isn't what you do when you're meditating alone, it's how awake you are when your boss gives you unexpected feedback, or when a coworker undermines you, or when the printer jams for the third time in one morning. That's your real spiritual curriculum. That's your real retreat. But most of us avoid this truth because it's uncomfortable. We want our peace in neatly packaged moments on yoga mats, in breathwork classes, during weekend hikes. And while those can be supportive, they're not the main event. They're practice. The real arena is the grind, the repetition, the pressure. That's where your illusions are tested. That's where your ego screams the loudest. And that's where your awakening can be most powerful. Because if you can keep your center there in the middle of the mess, then you're no longer a slave to circumstance. You're free. You're not waiting for the world to change so you can be happy. You're discovering that happiness doesn't live in the world outside you, it lives in the quality of your attention. And attention, my friend, is always within your control, even when nothing else is. Alan Watts would often remind us that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. And that includes your work life. The mistake we make is turning work into a constant puzzle, where every task is a means to an end, every day a stepping stone to some imagined future. But in doing that, we miss the point. The point is not to get to the end of the week faster. The point is to be fully alive in each moment, even the ones you'd rather skip. So, what if you stopped asking, how can I make this go faster? And started asking, how can I be more present for this? That shift alone could change your entire experience of work. Not because the work changes, but because you do. Because you're no longer chasing peace, you're being peace. So let's end with a challenge. Tomorrow when you go to work, don't just show up physically. Show up spiritually. Let each task be a meditation. Let each conversation be a moment of connection. Let each frustration be a doorway to awareness. And when you feel the urge to control, to impress, to rush, pause. Breathe. Remember who you are, not a cog in a machine, not a title on a business card, but a living expression of consciousness, dancing through form, doing something as seemingly ordinary and yet potentially sacred as answering emails or cleaning tables or closing deals. That's not just work. That's life itself. And when you see it that way, the office becomes your temple, the job becomes your practice, and peace stops being a weekend luxury and starts being your natural state, no matter where you are. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos that awaken your soul in the most unexpected places. And remember, the biggest mistake you're making at work is forgetting that you're already whole. Now take a moment and ask yourself, what if you never needed to earn your right to exist? What if your value wasn't something tied to your output, your efficiency, or your ability to stay on top of endless demands? This is the root of so much suffering at work. We've been sold the belief that our worth is conditional, that we are only as good as our latest success, our smartest contribution, or our most productive hour. But Alan Watts would tell us that's a fundamental misunderstanding of who we are. He would say, the meaning of life is just to be alive. That means your existence is already enough. Your being is not a resource to be harvested, It is a miracle to be experienced. And when you remember that, the pressure begins to dissolve. You stop trying to constantly prove yourself, and instead, you begin to express yourself. You work not from a place of fear, but from a place of fullness. But this is where most of us get caught. We confuse activity with meaning. We think that the busier we are, the more important we must be. But Watts would ask you busy doing what? And for whom? And to what end? Have you ever noticed that no matter how much you get done, the list grows longer? No matter how many goals you hit, there's always another one waiting. That's because the system is designed to keep you in motion, not in presence. It feeds off of your endless striving. But your soul doesn't want infinite motion. It wants depth. It wants connection. It wants truth, and you won't find that in the next email, or the next performance review, or even the next raise. You'll find it when you stop running, when you look around and realize that this moment is not preparation for life. It is life. So the next time you feel overwhelmed at work, try this. Pause. Just pause. Take a single breath and notice what's actually happening. Not the story you're telling yourself about how stressed you are, or how behind you are, or how little time you have. But what's actually happening. You'll find that in that micro moment of awareness, peace is already there. It was always there. You just weren't paying attention. Because the real trap isn't the workload, it's the belief that you need to control everything. The belief that you are separate from the flow of life, and that your job is to wrestle it into submission. But you're not separate, you're in the flow. You are the flow, and when you trust that, you stop resisting. You start working with life, not against it. And maybe that's the most revolutionary thing you could do right now. Not quit your job, not change careers, not run away, but stay and wake up. Be the one in the room who's actually present. Be the one who listens instead of reacts, who breathes instead of breaks down, who sees the sacred in the ordinary. That kind of presence is rare. That kind of presence transforms not just your experience, but the entire environment around you. People feel it. They are drawn to it, because deep down, we're all starving for it. We're starving for anyone to remind us that life isn't just about deadlines and deliverables. It's about being here fully awake, alive and free. And if you can bring that kind of presence into your work, then you haven't just avoided the biggest mistake, you've turned your job into a doorway to awakening. Thank you for going deeper with me. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not their job, they are far more. And remember what Alan Watts said, you are the universe experiencing itself. Even at work, especially at work,